First of all, thanks everybody for being here today. This council redistricting process was fair, transparent, and accomplished several objectives that we were required by law to do. We looked at the Civil Rights Act and other things to make sure that we put the appropriate guardrails and guidelines in place. For example, it was imperative to have a competitive Hispanic ward, and at the request of the Hispanic Alliance, especially my friend Jose Feliciano, we looked at where there could be potentially a second competitive Hispanic ward. The new Ward 14, which is being capably served by our majority whip, Jasmine Santana, has a 41% Hispanic population. The new Ward 11, predominantly the old Ward 15 and part of the old Ward 13, was reconfigured to reflect an approximate 29% Hispanic population. The consultants reviewed population loss, current ward configurations, and other data that was used to develop these maps. We set up 4 community meetings and received feedback from the public on a council website and instructed everyone how to use Dave's Redistricting as a tool to potentially see what kind of drafts were out there. We looked at every single one of those maps. The consultants looked at them as well to really see if any of those maps and those recommendations needed to be considered, and I will tell you that many of those recommendations were considered. Many council members like me discussed this process at our respective community meetings at length. After those steps were taken, we gave council members an opportunity to weigh in on the proposed maps and give their recommendations. Many council members had development projects and other initiatives that we took into consideration. Council members know their wards better than anyone. We attempted to place important landmarks, institutions, parks, and recreation centers in each ward. We attempted to prevent pitting incumbent council members, especially women, because we value the women that we have on council and wanted to preserve each and every woman that was contributing against running against each other. We tried our best to draw natural boundaries. Many people wanted us to draw straight lines and nice clean squares, circles, triangles, and shapes. However, ladies and gentlemen, population loss in distressed neighborhoods and migration to hot markets and hot neighborhoods made this an incredibly difficult challenge. We now have a map that is very close to being completed and will at best have minimal changes moving forward. We have to send these maps to the survey department so they can draw up the legal descriptions, which will take a considerable amount of time, especially in light of the holidays. After that, we will vote on the final proposed maps and send them to the Board of Elections so they can draw the precincts. I want to say this. To maintain objectivity, I stayed out of the way and away from drafting of these maps in the early days of this process. Once again, I only became involved in the process when council members' suggestions, recommendations, and feedback on the original proposed maps were discussed. We hired experts to conduct this work, and we trusted them to competently do their job. I'd like to thank our consultants, Mr. Bob Dykes and the Triad Research Group. I'd like to thank Dr. Mark Salling from Cleveland State University, an expert demographer. I'd like to thank Mr. Kent Whitley, a political consultant and architect in our community. I'd like to thank Daryl Torbert, our Chief Strategy Officer for Cleveland City Council, Steve Riss, our council staffer, and all of our council staff for contributing to this process. I also want to thank my colleagues and all the members of council for working through this difficult process. As I close, this was a tough process and not easy. Any present or former council member will tell you this is a grueling and unforgiving process to go through. Was the process perfect? I'm a perfectionist. I always see room for improvement. But we did not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let me make this clear. The residents mandated this when they supported a charter change in 2008 to tie council size to census results. If anything, this process showed us that we have to get people to fill out the census, and we have to improve quality of life in Cleveland to get our population numbers back up. No council member was targeted for elimination. These are not our seats. I and the consultants tried very hard to un-gerrymander the past gerrymandering that past councils have done with this process. False accusations, misinformation, and disinformation has been dangerous to this process. Many members of the community and some council members wanted to keep as much of their present ward as possible. It simply could not happen. Bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, 2 wards had to disappear because of population decline. We all, including me, had to give up some areas that we cherished and gain new area. I look forward to that challenge. Council is a body, and ward lines will not determine how we work together as a unit to accomplish the work of the people of this city. We'll now move to next steps and media questions, and we want you to hear more about the methodology and description of the map, and I will now turn it over to Mr. Bob Dykes, founder of the Triad Research Group at this time.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Bob Dykes from Triad Research. My role this afternoon is to give you some context and background for this process. And if we look at it, we actually see that the process of drawing districts goes back to the founding of our country and the writing of the Constitution. Our Constitution is unique in many ways, and one of the ways is that it mandates that Congress take a census of the population every 10 years. And so it has done ever since then. And it's the data that we get from this census that was used originally to apportion the Congress and has been the foundational data for any redistricting that's taken place since then. One of the things that's been true over most of our life as a country is that no one paid any attention to the disparity between districts in terms of the population. That was true throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th century. It was only in 1964 that the Supreme Court issued a ruling that's come to known as one person, one vote, that limited the disparity in the population of districts. And that's been true ever since then. And so there were lawsuits that were brought that forced people to redraw the districts. This happened in Cleveland. In the 1960s, when Carl Stokes was the mayor, a lawsuit was brought that the wards in Cleveland had too wide a population range. And if you look at the maps of the wards back then, you'll see that some were very tiny and some were quite large. And so the lawsuit was successful, and the city council had to redraw the wards at that time. And it's been that way ever since. And now, of course, as the council president alluded to, there was a charter change that tied the number of wards to the population of the city. I want to make a couple of other comments. One is that in drawing these wards, one of the things we had to pay attention to was the shape of the city. Cleveland has a very unique shape. If you compare the shape of Cleveland to, say, some of the major suburbs, like Lakewood or Euclid or North Olmsted, you can see that those are roughly rectangular blobs, whereas Cleveland is not. Cleveland has, if you will, 4 protrusions or fingers, one in Collinwood, one in Harvard Lee, one in Old Brooklyn, and one on the far west side by the airport. So it is very difficult more difficult to draw districts in an irregular area like Cleveland than it is in a place like Lakewood. So one of the things you have to do when you pay attention to that is you need to start in the corners. If you start in the center, then you can find yourself, when you reach a corner, not having enough population or having too much population for a ward. So when in our process, we followed that procedure of starting in the corners and moving toward the center. The consequence of this is that the change in the corners is generally a little less than the change in the center, and there's no real way to avoid that. And that's particularly true in this case, where we had to reduce the number of wards by 2. So I just wanted to bring that particular point to your attention. But finally, I'll conclude by saying that it's been my pleasure to work with the council in previous redistricting attempts, and I would say that this attempt at this time, this plan we've come to, was the most open and inclusive of all the processes that I've had the pleasure of working on. With that, I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Mark Sallin.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I want to start off by talking about some general principles of redistricting. That includes the fact that we have to have equal population, as Mr. Dykes mentioned, one person, one vote. In the case of local redistricting, you have to be within plus or minus 5% of the average ward population. So that was a constraint that was hard set that we couldn't possibly violate, okay? That was one constraint. And we had to use the census data. Some people in the community, at some of our community meetings suggested, and also on submissions to the council website, suggested that we use more up-to-date data. But all the courts have ruled that you must use Census Bureau data, the decennial census. It also is the data that is most accurate and complete, especially for small areas known as census blocks that can be used to accumulate areas known for districts and wards. So we are bound to use the 2020 census, and that's what we did. So we also, of course, adhere to the Voting Rights Act, which, again, I'll mention the Hispanic community was arguing for some influence there, and so we respected their opinion about that, and that is part of the Voting Rights Act. They also can't be split up into little islands of the same ward, so that's spatial contiguity. And the issue of compactness, a lot of people think that compactness is really important for drawing districts or wards, and really it has no value in itself being compact, I would argue, but it is an indication of whether or not some reason why you have to look at why something isn't compact. Maybe there's a spur that comes out from a neighborhood or area, and you can question why isn't it more compact. So compactness is an indicator that some other factors were involved in drawing that district. That's really what it's all about. And then there's communities of interest. In our case, we're thinking about neighborhoods. We had a lot of feedback about wanting to preserve neighborhoods in Cleveland. And on that subject, I want to jump to the next slide and mention the fact that neighborhoods are very diverse. That is to say, there are many of them. Who can define neighborhoods? City of Cleveland has what are known as statistical planning areas. Those are referred to as neighborhoods. There are also CDC service areas that the city also recognizes and helps fund. And those are not necessarily compact. So there are those kinds of things. And they change continuously. Neighborhoods are not stable. They're very dynamic. And so if we come up with a plan now that adheres to one particular neighborhood or a set of neighborhoods, who's to say that those neighborhoods won't change in the next 5 years or 10 years or whatever? But we do recognize the importance of neighborhoods. No ward plan could completely adhere to the diversity of wards that people think about when they think about the diversity of Cleveland. Nevertheless, we tried to maintain as much as we could adherence to the idea of wards. Council people themselves reflected what they thought their wards were in their area, in their wards, and we took that into consideration. So we looked at all those kinds of aspects of wards and came up with the best plan that we could. So with that, I'll also mention how the process actually works. So this is a map that you see here of the city of Cleveland, and those little lines that are on the map represent census blocks. And there are some 6,000 or more census blocks in Cleveland, and that's what we use to build the wards. Next slide. So when we zoom in to a portion of the city of Cleveland, you can see the boundaries of these blocks, and the population numbers are in those blocks. So you can see that each block has a population associated with it. And the process then is, the next slide, to use software to start adding blocks together that are contiguous until you reach a population that's within plus or minus 5% of the average population of a ward, and then go on to another ward, and then to another ward, building that population number. And then you have to make adjustments because you realize that, okay, now we have to add some population to this ward, take some away from this ward, et cetera. And there's a constant dynamic process of adjusting and readjusting those ward boundaries with census blocks and the populations within them. So that's the basic process that we went through. Okay? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good process analysis.
We now hear from Kent Whitley.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We had 3 incredible meetings out in the city of Cleveland, and I just want to reiterate that the council president is the first council president to ever involve the citizens and come to the citizens with redistricting questions and answers. The meetings were attended highly by the council members you see here. They went to the east side, the ones from the west side, went to the east side, the ones from the east side, went to the west side, and of course they all met at downtown Cleveland at our meeting. We had some tough questions and answers that we incorporated into some of these maps. Also, as you know, as the council president said earlier, that they were allowed to make their maps themselves, but we reiterated to the citizens that you have to draw the entire map, just not your ward. So they understood the struggle that we went through throughout drawing the whole map. They got to participate in that process. I'm very proud of this council as far as transparency. We've gone back and forth with the media, with the citizens. This process has been all out in the open, and we ought to be very proud of this council. The concerns that arose, the Hispanic Roundtable, as the council president said earlier, they had a written and prepared statement for us, and their main concern was a lot. Besides the written statement by the Hispanic Roundtable, was keeping neighborhoods whole and making sure institutions and landmarks stayed in their wards. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So before we pivot to questions, and once again, these questions will be for the media. I'm pretty sure that all of us will have a lot of time to engage the residents. I do want to outline next steps that will be taken. This map will be placed on council's website. I believe it already has been placed on there, which is www.clevelandcitycouncil.org. Once again, that is www.clevelandcitycouncil.org. If you look here to the side, you also have a backslash that says redistricting. So if anybody wants to submit any comments and do these types of engagement, you're welcome to do so. We will collect public feedback through a dedicated phone number, 216-714-3006, or you can give comment via online public comment at www.clevelandcitycouncil.org or by email at maps@clevelandcitycouncil.org. I will tell you that I try to review as many of these submissions and try to understand as many as possible. My team and myself went through many of the maps that were submitted online and actually showed where there were some deficiencies of why we couldn't move forward with certain maps and why certain maps suggestions were taken. The maps will now be submitted to our Office of Capital Projects, the Survey Division, so that they can create ward descriptions and legal ward descriptions so that we can have final legislation in January in order to move to the next step. Council must have these legal descriptions before we vote. These legal descriptions take a significant amount of time to do, and we must take into consideration this is the holiday season. We were thrown for a loop when there was a special election that was taking place on May the 6th, which we were instructed by the Board of Elections that they need to draw and certify the precincts that go with the maps by their last meeting or their meeting in February the 18th. And it's going to take them a significant period of time to do that. So with that, we'll take questions about the process and next steps. And once again, any of my team, I want to thank everybody. This is a tough process. It is not easy. I will tell you that there are some areas of Ward 6 that I cherished and really valued and had a great relationship, but because of population loss and decline, I had to give some of it up. And I have to go into some new areas. And I'm looking forward to that, working with my colleagues on whatever they decide to do. I myself personally am going to take the rest of the month of December and figure out what we need to do with our future. So, questions from the observer. Please say your name so that we can become familiar with you. I may know you, but everybody may not.
I'm Calvin from the Cleveland Observer, and this is about process. When you actually found out that you had the fingers, as you called them, what was the process after that? Did you progress the fingers down to a square and then divide up the squares? Or what happened after? Did you just take one finger and go across the board?
Mr. Silent, did you want to? If you could come over here by the microphone. Thank you.
So as Mr. Dykes mentioned, the process is best done starting in the corners and working towards the middle. And as you build a ward and it meets the population requirements, then you move to the next place. So you are adding census blocks. They're not nice squares. As you saw on the map that I had up there, they're based on streets mostly, rail lines, maybe some water lines, delineate the boundaries of blocks. Most of them are rectangular in an urban area like Cleveland, but not all of them are. So you keep adding blocks until you get another ward population, and you keep going. When you get to the middle, you realize I have too much population or not enough population to build another ward over here or whatever. So then you back up and you start adjusting the population by moving blocks from one ward to the next ward. And then you realize that affects the ward adjacent to it, right? So it's a domino effect that you have to constantly be working on to come up with a balanced population-wise plan. And then you look at the other considerations about the neighborhoods and about the issues of the Voting Rights Act. And you also want to try to use main streets because people think about main streets as being good dividing lines, maybe some natural boundaries. We have only one ward in this plan that crosses the Cuyahoga River, for example. So we try to look at those kinds of features in order to come up with wards which are as sort of compact, but in some cases we couldn't maintain the compactness in order to achieve other things that needed to be done. But we recognize that the public looks at these things and wants to see a concise sort of plan for a ward plan, and I think we've achieved that.
Thank you.
Abby Marshall, Idea Stream Public Media. I was curious if you have this public already or if you'll make it public, the population breakdowns in each ward. I know it was about 25,000 plus or minus, I think, a 5% margin of error, but I was hoping, I know there was discussion about population density on the west side versus geographic on the east side, so I was just hoping to get some more information on that.
We do have the old population numbers for the wards, and we do have the proposed populations for the recommended. I will tell you that in looking at those, a lot of the population loss was on the southeast and northeast side of town. A lot of the population that was very dense was on a lot of the west side part of town. So we had to look at those things and take those things into consideration too. I will tell you that one of the things we did not mention, and I'm going to look at Dr. Saling, I think that the average number that we were trying to get to was about 24,800, which means that the 5% that we could go over was 26,084. The population that we had to stay under was 23,000.
Had to be over 23.6.
Over 23,600. So the lowest we could go per ward is 23,600 or so. The highest we could go is 26,084, which means that areas like mine, and not mine because they're not our wards, but areas in the areas that I serve are right at that precipice where we're right at that 23,000 plus. I think right now I'm only 46 over, or even less than that, where other wards have approximately 26,000 because they have such high density in their areas, or mainly on the west side areas.
Kelly.
And I believe we got, I'm trying to follow instructions, I believe we got about 3 more questions, but yes, ma'am.
Sorry to interrupt you. Kelly Kennedy, 19 News. I see you're still allowing for public comment on this proposed map. I know the timeline for getting this done is pretty tight, but does that mean that this map could still see some major changes depending on community input?
Minimal at best. And the reason that I have to say that is because, as I mentioned, we're dealing with a time crunch where it's going to take a significant amount of time for our survey department to make the legal descriptions, and it's going to take a significant amount of time for the Board of Elections. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, we're elected to do a job. We have to make some tough decisions. The people elected us to serve. I know that there's a notion that somehow 372,000 people could get in the room and draw a map. It doesn't work like that. We did take feedback proactively. We did listen to the council members proactively. But at the end of the day, this council has to make a decision. And I know that people like to do paralysis by analysis, but I think we're very close to making a decision. If anything, a couple of my colleagues might have a couple of things that they may approach us with, but we have to finalize this, move it forward. Once again, we try to take the public's comments, but I will tell you, it is impossible for 372,000 people to draw a map.
Thanks very much. Nick Castell with Signal Cleveland. There's a couple of odd shapes in this map. I mean, I'm especially looking at like Slavic Village, Kinsman, Buckeye Shaker area. Why does it look the way it does with like, you know, the 3, 5, and 6 especially?
We could, if the consultants want to look at this, but I will tell you that, once again, those are some of the areas that had the biggest population loss. The areas that we all serve had a tremendous amount of population loss in the northeast and southeast part of town. So many of the east side wards, we had to find a way to stretch them further west and further north. Where many of the west side wards, we tried to push north and south in order to accommodate most of what we needed to do. It was strictly about numbers. It wasn't like articulated. Yes, there were some development issues and other things that certain council members were looking at. However, we could accommodate some, but we couldn't accommodate all. Yes, sir.
Jeff Rodell, KYC. Thank you for all your hard work. As you look at it, does this actively represent Cleveland moving forward and into the future?
I stand very firm on this process. I believe that this does accurately reflect Cleveland. I will tell you that if there was a way to even make it better, I would have loved to have looked at that. But I truly believe that we have a work product that Cleveland could be proud of. I know that there are other groups and folks out there that believe that they could do a better job of doing this. I would tell you that, you know, I wish you could have been in my shoes the last couple of months. This is any council member, former or present, will tell you that this is a very difficult process, a lot of sacrifice, but a lot of opportunity. So I believe that this reflects Cleveland because of that. Cleveland is a city that is very tenacious, and we accept these kind of challenges. We're one Cleveland, one neighborhood, and at the end of the day, this is not about advocating for any individual council members. This is about trying to make sure that we had a process that we felt was fair, transparent, and accomplished all of the things that we were supposed to legally accomplish. Yes, sir.
I spoke to a few residents earlier today that have common concerns. You probably know what they are, right? Can you speak directly to those people that are worried that I don't know, especially with Spencer leaving, right? They're going to get a new council person they may not align with, they're new to, they might disagree with. Can you speak to those people that may look at these maps with concern that, I don't know, like I said, they may be worried their views won't align with that council person?
That's what elections are for.
Yeah.
Everybody has an opportunity to run. That's why you'll very rarely hear me say my ward. I don't own Ward 6. I own a house in Ward 6. So it's not my ward, and we didn't draw it for that reason. We drew it based on a process that we believe was fair and consistent. We drew it based on how, you know, we wanted to do all the things that we just said with the methodology. There were some considerations regarding council members, with some saying that they were going to leave and some saying that they had other ideas. For example, the new Ward 11, which I happen to think is a very special ward, actually, I think has some tremendous opportunities. And as much as we all enjoyed working with Councilwoman Spencer, who we think has been an asset to this council, they have an opportunity to get somebody there who can align with their issues. But I will tell you, many of these wards are changing. I have an area that pushes me more, the area that I'm going to have to run in, more towards the Huff area. And as much as I love Huff and I'm looking forward to engaging residents over there, I don't have a constituency base over there. So once again, everybody had to sacrifice, but everybody has opportunities.
Hi. Kim
Ms.
Palmer from Cranes. I'm wondering, is this similar or the map that caused the tensions in November at the city council meeting? Can you tell me if this is the map or were changes made after that day?
Changes were made after that day, and I want to revisit that if we could. The purpose for that map was we had gotten community input. The consultants drew some of the things that they made recommendations on, and then 17 members of council had a chance to look and say, you know, as my good friend, I'm gonna use Danny Kelly for an example. So, you know, you guys may think he's quiet, but he says, Blaine, you know, you may know the east side, you may not know the west side like you do, and I'm making this suggestion that we look at X, Y, Z. And I have to trust my colleagues. This business is built off of teamwork. And all of these colleagues had an opportunity to weigh in. Once these colleagues had an opportunity to weigh in, we were able to accommodate some we were not. That's the tough part about being in leadership, is that you got to make tough calls and tough decisions. But once you do it, you got to be able to stand on your process and stand your ground. Yes.
Cole Molesky, 19 News. You mentioned population a lot. Was there anything when you were going over some of the numbers where there were neighborhoods where you were really concerned about the lack of population from when you're drawing this maps to last time you were visited? Any concern about maybe shifts in areas?
All of those. I would tell you that the number one issue that most of us has is how we can improve quality of life and try to bring in more people to our neighborhoods. One of the biggest investments we made with the Southeast Council people, Councilman Bishop, myself, Councilwoman Gray, as well as Councilman Starr, is we really tried to focus on the corridor of 105th and 93rd in order to try to build it back up with population, with homes, with Habitat for Humanity houses. We have a CMHA project that we're putting together over there. We tried to focus in those areas where we knew that there were opportunities for growth, layered upon the largest employer in the city of Cleveland, which is Cleveland Clinic, and the state of Ohio. So we saw that as an opportunity based on studies that were done by like Richie Preparian, where we actually are looking in some of those areas that you mentioned that we have concerns and try to grow the population. Councilman Starr has been doing a yeoman's job along some areas to try to help grow population. So at the end of the day, we all have been committed to trying to grow Cleveland's population. You know, so we were all concerned, especially with the southeast and northeast part of town. I will tell you that there were concerns that we would potentially lose even more wards because the population was just so challenging. Hence Nick's question about it being a little bit, some wards being a little bit awkward.
Right.
Yes.
So which incumbents are drawn in with each other who'll have to run against each other next year?
I'm gonna let you guys figure that out. I think it's kind of self-explanatory. But I will say this to you, it's self-explanatory. That wasn't the design of this. Once again, for example, I wanna just say this because this gentleman has been a tremendous colleague. You notice Collinwood is one Collinwood. Councilman Polinsik has says, Blaine, don't worry about me. I just want to work with Councilman Harrison to make one Collinwood. We'll figure out the politics later. But I really think, I really want to advocate for one Collinwood. I had him and Mr. Harrison because as much as I like to think that I know Collinwood, my mother lives in Collinwood, I don't know Collinwood like those two gentlemen. So they sat down and they had conversations. And the one thing that they both have said that they have committed to is that they would have a non-toxic race, that if they did have to run against each other, that they would, that it would be a gentleman's match. And I'm going to hold both of them accountable for that if that's the case. I will tell you that a couple of the other wards, and I don't want to drop any names, but you heard at the council meeting, one council person said that they didn't feel like it was a clean line to draw them east. We took their consideration. They're now back on the east side. And at the end of the day, those are the things that we took into consideration. But it's pretty self-explanatory. Anybody could look and see based on where the houses are, where there will potentially be some races. And I want to state this, that it will potentially, I'll probably, there are people that potentially may run against all of us. Once again, these are not our seats. We don't own these seats. I just want to make sure that I defend the process. I got one more question and then we're going to wrap up and then I will make myself available if anybody has any further questions one-on-one. Any more questions? All right, ladies and gentlemen, all that we ask is that we get fair and honest reporting. I really regret that a lot of misinformation and disinformation has been put out there. The members of this body really worked hard through this process, and I want to commend the consultants. I think we got a product that Cleveland could be proud of. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy yourself. I'll make myself available.